In today's episode, we're diving into these famous people who were eaten alive by deadly animals. From Timothy Treadwell, the grizzly man whose bond with bears led to a horrifying attack, to Dingo Dinkelman, a fearless YouTuber whose obsession with venomous snakes ended in tragedy. It was September 4th, 2006, and the morning carried an unusual stillness. The sea breeze that normally whipped through Port Douglas felt heavier as Steve Irwin, 44, loaded his truck with supplies. He was heading to Bat Reef near the Great Barrier Reef to film underwater footage for Ocean's Deadliest, a documentary directed by John Stanton for the Discovery Channel. Steve Irwin had become a household name, known for his fearless adventures and deep love for wildlife. Though many knew him as the crocodile hunter, Steve's true passion lay in preserving the natural world and educating others about it. Growing up surrounded by animals, Steve had carried that passion into his adult life, not only as a TV personality but also as an environmentalist and conservationist. It was this drive that had made Australia Zoo, once the small Queensland Reptile and Fauna Park, into a major destination for wildlife education and care. Australia Zoo, under Steve's leadership, became a symbol of his commitment to animals and nature, where he worked tirelessly to protect endangered species and raise awareness about conservation. As Steve's fame grew, so did his involvement in various projects, including the documentary they were filming that day. Stanton, assigned to the crew, was part of the team on set and had been preparing for the shoot on September 4th. However, in the days leading up to it, a sense of unease began to settle over him. Despite discussing his concerns with colleagues and considering postponing the shoot, the financial stakes of the production made any delay impossible. In a moment of growing discomfort, Stanton even drafted a will before reluctantly joining Steve and cameraman Justin Lyons aboard the Croc 1, Steve's 75-foot research vessel. Perhaps deep down he may have already known that something would go terribly wrong, a fear that would soon prove all too true. The boat sliced through the waters near the reef, its wake cutting across the sea's surface like a scar. The reef teemed with marine life. Sea turtles glided effortlessly in the currents, dolphins breached in the distance, and schools of fish shimmered in flashes of color beneath the waves. The crew had set their sights on filming sharks for the day's segment. Steve and Justin donned their snorkels and entered the water, only to find the sea murky and visibility poor. The risk of pursuing sharks was too great, so they decided to call off filming. Just as they prepared to ascend, Steve's eyes caught sight of a stingray resting on the ocean floor. The stingray was massive, spanning over 6 feet from tip to tip, with a long whip-like tail extending behind it. Steve knew stingrays were rarely aggressive unless provoked, but their sharp, venomous barbs were powerful enough to defend them against predators. For Steve, this was a rare opportunity. He signaled Justin to film it, thinking the footage could also work for his daughter Bindy's wildlife show. Steve swam closer to the animal, marveling at its grace. Stingrays were unusually shy, but this one lay still, blending perfectly with the sandy seabed. Steve hovered just a few feet above it, positioning himself for the perfect angle. Despite his years of experience, he remained unaware of the sudden danger building below. Without warning, the stingray's tail lashed upward with incredible speed and precision. Its barb pierced Steve's chest, leaving a 2-inch wound. The strike was so swift that it took a moment for Steve to register what had happened. Pain radiated through his body as blood began to cloud the water. Justin dropped the camera and rushed to Steve, who signaled to keep filming even through the chaos. But Justin knew the situation was critical. Fearing that the blood could attract sharks, he grabbed Steve and helped him swim toward the surface. Breaking through the water, they gasped for air. Steve clutched his chest, struggling to speak. He managed to say his lungs had been punctured, but the reality was worse. The stingray's barb had pierced his heart, a devastating injury that caused severe internal bleeding. The crew on the Croc 1 acted quickly. They pulled Steve into an inflatable boat, pressing towels to his chest to stem the blood loss. Steve's face grew pale, his breathing labored. As Justin and the others worked frantically, they begged him to hold on for his family. Despite their efforts, Steve's strength faded. In his final moments, he calmly said, "I'm dying," before losing consciousness. The crew raced back to shore hoping for a miracle. Paramedics were waiting, but their efforts to revive him were in vain. Steve Irwin was pronounced dead at the scene. Even with immediate hospital care, his injuries would have been nearly impossible to survive. The entire incident, from the Stingray's strike to Steve's final moments, was captured on Justin's camera. However, out of respect for Steve's legacy and to spare his family the pain of reliving the tragedy, the footage was destroyed at the family's request. Steve's wife Terry and their children Bindi and Robert were in Tasmania at the time. They received the devastating news hours later and returned to Australia Zoo, where they were met with an overwhelming outpouring of grief and support from fans and colleagues. Thousands gathered at the zoo to pay their respects, laying flowers and sharing stories of how Steve had inspired them. Steve had once said his greatest hope was to pass his love of nature to his children. In the years that followed, Bindi and Robert carried on his legacy, dedicating themselves to wildlife conservation. They continued his work at the Australia Zoo, ensuring that his passion and mission lived on. Although Steve Irwin's life ended suddenly, his impact remains enduring. He died as he lived, immersed in the wild, bridging the gap between people and nature, and leaving behind a legacy that continues to inspire millions. Steve's tragic death wasn't the only one caught on camera. Timothy Treadwell, a young man captivated by his love for bears, set out on an outing with his girlfriend only for both to become the target of the very creatures he admired. What unfolded was a chilling tragedy, all captured on tape. It was a cold, overcast morning in the remote wilderness of Katmai National Park, Alaska, where the natural beauty of the land was interrupted by an uninvited danger. The vast expanse of forest stretched out in every direction, unbroken, save for the footprints of those who ventured into this bear territory. Timothy Treadwell and his girlfriend Amy Huguenard had arrived in late September, eager to capture their final moments in the wild before the coming winter. But their arrival, just before the bears would begin their hibernation, set a dangerous stage for what was to come. Timothy had always felt a pull toward the wilderness. Born in New York in 1957, he grew up in a tumultuous household. He later moved to Long Beach, California for college, where he fell into a destructive party lifestyle and struggled with addiction to cocaine and heroin. By the late 1980s, his drug use spiraled out of control, culminating in his expulsion from college. The turning point came when he overdosed and barely survived, a wake-up call that forced him to face his demons. Seeking a new direction, he found solace in the wilds of Alaska, particularly among the grizzly bears of Katmai National Park. Over the next 13 years, Timothy became increasingly captivated by the park's bears. He earned minor fame as a self-proclaimed bear whisperer and eco-warrior, spending summers recording hours of video footage interacting with the animals. His apparent fearlessness earned him a following, though his lack of professional training left him ill-prepared for the risks he was taking. His belief that the bears saw him as a friend, not a threat, led him to make a critical mistake. He chose to forego bear spray, relying instead on his perceived rapport with the creatures, a decision that would ultimately seal his fate. The pair had flown into the park with Willie Fulton, a local pilot, to observe the brown bears that Timothy had studied for years. Their timing, however, was risky. Arriving just before hibernation meant food would soon be scarce, leaving the bears hungry, aggressive, and more prone to seeing humans as easy targets. Their plan was to capture the bears' final moments before winter, but this timing mistake would put them in harm's way. As they tracked a few bears, Timothy quickly realized that most of the ones he had previously studied had already entered hibernation. The remaining bears were unfamiliar, and though a sense of unease lingered in the air, he decided to stay and set up camp with Amy. On October 5th, they began preparing their camera for footage. The setup was nearly done. The camera was on, recording audio, but the lens cap remained, ensuring no visuals were captured. Outside, the soft sound of rain pattered as Amy adjusted the equipment inside the tent. After a while, Amy called up to Timothy, asking if he was still out there, as she hadn't heard him in a while. Then the first scream broke the silence. Timothy's voice screamed for Amy to get out of the tent and run, as a 28-year-old male bear attacked him. Amy rushed to open the tent, shouting for Timothy to play dead, hoping it would make the bear lose interest. For a moment, the bear seemed to retreat, and Timothy's voice could be heard asking if the danger had passed. It was a brief respite, but the bear returned quickly, more aggressive than before. Timothy's screams grew louder and more desperate as the bear returned, its teeth sinking deeper into his flesh. In his panic, he begged Amy to hit the bear, pleading for her to do something. She grabbed a frying pan and swung it at the bear, striking its head. The bear released its grip on Timothy's head, but quickly latched onto his thigh, dragging him away from Amy. Blood covered Timothy, and with the realization that he had no chance of survival, he shouted at Amy to run to save herself. He knew the attack was fatal. Unlike many other victims of bear attacks, Timothy didn't slip into shock. He remained fully aware as he was torn apart by the very creature he had once revered. The bear made little noise aside from the occasional growl. The only sounds that broke the silence were Timothy's screams and the dull thud of his body being dragged across the dirt. Amy, frozen in fear and shock, didn't leave. Terrified by what she had just witnessed, she remained helpless. She wasn't familiar with the area, having come to the park only because of Timothy, and had no way of finding her way back to civilization. On the recording, her scream pierces the air, a raw, desperate cry as the horrifying reality set in. But her screams only drew the bear back, and Amy too was mauled to death by the same animal. The next morning, air taxi pilot Willie Fulton arrived at Kaflia Lake, where he was supposed to pick up the couple. Spotting what looked like Timothy waving a tarp in the distance, Willie called out but received no response. Concerned, he decided to hike up the path toward the campsite to investigate. As he walked the trail, he saw nothing out of the ordinary, no signs of activity or movement. Uneasy but finding no immediate cause for alarm, Willie turned back toward his plane. Just as he reached it, a sudden chill ran down his spine. About 20 feet away, a large brown bear stood, watching him silently from the brush. Willie climbed into his plane, heart pounding, and started the engine, hoping the noise would scare off the bear. Circling above the campsite, he scanned the area and froze. Below, the bear was feeding on something. As he focused, his stomach dropped. He could see the remains of a human rib cage in the bear's jaws. Hastily, Willie called the park rangers, guiding them to the site. As they approached, they encountered a few bears along the path but didn't feel threatened. However, when they neared the camp, one ranger spotted a bear just 20 feet away, its proximity raising immediate concern. It wasn't intimidated. It stood its ground, unafraid of their presence. The rangers immediately opened fire, discharging 21 rounds before the bear finally fell. The rangers continued to the camp, where they found 2 collapsed tents and signs of a struggle. The entrance to Amy's tent was partially buried in mud. When they cleared the mud, they found her body almost unrecognizable, buried as though the bear had planned to leave her there for the winter. Her body appeared to be peacefully resting, but the gruesome truth was evident. She had been nearly consumed. They moved on, searching for Timothy. His remains were scattered in the nearby woods. His head, still attached to part of his spine, bore a grimace of pain. His right arm and hand were found not far away, the watch still strapped to his wrist. The scene was gruesome, and the rangers worked quickly to recover what was left. As they continued searching, a smaller bear, no older than 3 years old, stalked them from about 30 feet away. It made its intentions clear, edging closer as if to attack. The rangers quickly shot it, not willing to take any chances after the previous horrors. Once the bodies were removed from the site, the rangers sent the larger bear's remains for a necropsy. The results confirmed that it had consumed human remains, including clothing, confirming it was the bear responsible for Timothy and Amy's deaths. Timothy Treadwell wasn't the only one dedicating his life to the animals he loved. Dingo Dinkelman, a South African YouTuber with a similar passion, shared an obsession for wildlife. But despite being more cautious, he too ultimately fell victim to the very creatures he admired. It was a humid, warm morning in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, where the land met the edge of dense green forests and open plains. The air was thick with the scent of earth and vegetation, the type of fragrance that filled the lungs and stirred an appreciation for the wilderness. In the distance, the towering mountains framed the horizon, and from every corner of the landscape, life could be heard. An orchestra of birds calling, insects buzzing, and the rustle of grass in the wind. It was here that Dingo Dinkelman had grown up, surrounded by the vastness and untamed beauty of nature. As a young boy, Dingo's curiosity knew no bounds. His parents often watched from the windows of their home as he wandered the grounds, collecting reptiles, insects, and anything else that piqued his interest. They would see him sit for hours, observing the creatures, studying their movements, learning their behaviors. It was no surprise when Dingo made the decision to dedicate his life to wildlife conservation. The pull of nature was too strong to ignore. He felt compelled to protect the animals that had fascinated him from the beginning, and to show others the wonder of the creatures many feared. After completing high school, Dingo's path was clear. He became a nature guide, specializing in reptiles in the reserves of KwaZulu-Natal. His charm and knowledge made him a favorite among tourists, but it was his willingness to interact with some of the most dangerous animals that set him apart. Crocodiles, venomous snakes, and the many predators of the region held no fear for him. His respect for these creatures was absolute. He used his expertise to educate the public and dispel myths, teaching them to respect rather than fear these misunderstood animals. Dingo's YouTube channel, which showcased his daring encounters with deadly reptiles, soon attracted millions of viewers worldwide. His ability to break down complex information while keeping the audience captivated earned him a global following. He was often described as the Steve Irwin of South Africa, a title he wore with pride. His charisma and skill made him a hero to many, and he was recognized by both local and international conservation organizations for his efforts. But Dingo's work was not just about entertaining. He had a vision, one that involved creating a place where endangered species could thrive. He founded Dingo's Animal Kingdom, a nature park in KwaZulu-Natal dedicated to the conservation of vulnerable animals. Through donations, Dingo raised 750,000 South African rand in just 42 days. This achievement highlighted his ability to inspire others to join the fight for wildlife preservation. The park quickly became a sanctuary for some of the world's most endangered creatures, where visitors could not only learn about the animals but also engage with them in meaningful ways. The park stood apart in its approach. Dingo didn't just want to show people the animals, he wanted them to understand and appreciate them. Visitors had the opportunity to handle reptiles, learn about venomous snakes, and witness firsthand the challenges of wildlife preservation. The park's success was a testament to Dingo's ability to connect with people on a personal level. He used every opportunity to teach, hoping to break down the fear that many had of creatures like black mambas and crocodiles. He showed these animals not as threats, but as vital parts of the ecosystem. In addition to the park, Dingo's work with reptiles was legendary. His most famous stunt involved spending 5 nights in a 20-foot by 6-foot cage surrounded by 16 dangerous reptiles. It was a test of his knowledge, his courage, and his understanding of the animals he worked with. The event became a symbol of his dedication to changing the public's perception of these misunderstood creatures. However, Dingo's passion for wildlife conservation came with real dangers. He knew the dangers involved in working with venomous animals, but he accepted them as part of his mission. On September 30th, 2024, Dingo was demonstrating the handling of a mamba, one of the deadliest snakes in the world, when disaster struck. The snake, despite being handled with care, bit him. Dingo's known allergy to venom triggered an immediate and severe reaction. Within minutes, he was in anaphylactic shock and was rushed to the hospital by his wife, Kirsty, who had always been by his side through every dangerous encounter. Kirsty kept the world updated through their social media pages, where followers from around the globe sent their well wishes and prayers. Dingo was placed in a medically induced coma to give his body the best chance to recover, but for 3 weeks his condition remained unchanged. The doctors and nurses worked tirelessly, but Dingo's health continued to deteriorate. Kirsty remained steadfast by his side, holding on to hope, praying for a miracle. Kirsty described the difficult days, her voice unwavering even in the face of uncertainty. "I wish I could share better news, but Dingo is still in the hospital and his condition remains unchanged. Thankfully, we were able to get him to the hospital in time. He's in ICU on a ventilator and remains in a medically induced coma. The doctors are keeping him heavily sedated to give his body the best chance to recover fully." Despite the efforts to save him, Dingo's condition worsened, and he passed away on October 26, 2024. A heartbreaking loss for both his family and the conservation community. His work had inspired millions to respect wildlife, face their fears, and become involved in conservation. Tributes from around the world poured in, remembering him not just as a conservationist, but as a teacher, a friend, and an enduring inspiration. Dingo's tragic passing underscored the unpredictable risks of working with wildlife, where even the most experienced can fall prey to nature's raw power. This truth would soon be driven home again by 19-year-old folk singer Taylor Mitchell, whose peaceful hike through Cape Breton Highlands National Park was violently interrupted by the sudden aggression of wild coyotes, reminding us that danger can strike even in the most serene settings. It was October 27, 2009, when the peaceful landscape of Cape Breton Island was shattered. The towering pine and fir trees, the distant sound of the Atlantic Ocean, and the quiet trails of Cape Breton Highlands National Park seemed to hold a calm that would soon be disrupted by tragedy. Taylor Mitchell, a 19-year-old folk singer from Toronto, had arrived in Cape Breton for a performance scheduled 2 days later. With time to spare before her show, she decided to hike the park's renowned Skyline Trail, eager to experience the natural beauty she cherished. As an environmentalist, Taylor found solace in nature, and the hike seemed like the perfect opportunity to unwind. It was a bright, sunny afternoon when Taylor parked her car near the Skyline Trail access road. The trail began in a clearing just 100 feet from the parking lot, offering stunning views of the Gulf of St. Lawrence to the north and the lush forests of Cape Breton to the south. The landscape was an inviting escape, and as Taylor walked, she found herself immersed in the calm, taking in the fresh air and the sounds of nature. She was alone, unaware of the dangers moving just behind her. Around 2:30 p.m., Taylor passed a couple heading down the trail. They exchanged brief greetings and Taylor continued on her way. The couple, descending the trail, spotted 2 large coyotes moving in the opposite direction. One of the hikers snapped a photo of them, intrigued by their size. Shortly after, they heard an eerie cry, loud, unsettling, but indistinct. It was difficult to tell whether it was an animal or human, but it made the couple uneasy. They quickly made their way back to the parking lot and called 911, concerned by the strange sound. The coyotes, drawn by the scent and movement of Taylor, silently stalked her. These eastern coyotes, descendants of an interbreeding with wolves as they migrated north, were larger and more intelligent than typical coyotes. While they usually avoided humans, something about Taylor, alone and unaware, made her an easy target. As Taylor continued down the trail, the coyotes closed in on her. Their growls, low and persistent, grew louder as they moved closer. The sounds of her footsteps and the wind rustling through the trees masked the predator's approach. Taylor turned and saw them. A pair of large coyotes, their eyes locked onto her. Fear surged through her and she began to run. Coyotes are relentless predators and the chase was on. The animals, using their size and speed, quickly closed the gap. Taylor stumbled as she tried to escape, the trail now a trap. The forest around her seemed to narrow as she fled. The once inviting path became treacherous, and the ground beneath her feet felt unstable. Her heart pounded in her chest as she pushed herself harder, trying to escape. The coyotes, swift and calculated, pushed her deeper into the woods, their growls getting closer with every step. Taylor stumbled at the top of a small hill, her legs burning with exhaustion. Ahead, in a clearing at the head of the Skyline Trail, she spotted a washroom. Desperation surged through her. Gritting her teeth, she pushed forward, sprinting toward the structure as her labored breaths mingled with the snapping jaws of the coyotes behind her. Reaching the door, she grabbed the handle and pulled, but it wouldn't budge, locked or jammed. Panic set in as she clawed at the door, leaving bloody streaks from her scraped hands. The growls behind her grew louder, closer. Turning, she pressed her back against the door, her heart pounding as the coyotes lunged. Their sharp teeth sank into her legs and she cried out in pain. The force knocked her off balance, sending her stumbling forward and crashing to the ground. The coyotes seized the moment, biting at her head and limbs, tearing through her clothing and skin. Blood began to pool on the dirt beneath her, staining the earth. Desperate, Taylor reached for the small pocket knife in her bag and swung it at the animals. But they were too strong and determined. The coyotes didn't back off. In the distance, a group of hikers noticed Taylor's abandoned belongings scattered on the trail. They found her camera still resting on the ground and began calling out for her, but received no response. Moving forward, they followed blood smears leading to the washroom door. A single coyote stood over her motionless body nearby, its eyes narrowed in hostility. Alarmed, the hikers rushed forward, shouting to scare the animal away. The coyote, unafraid, snarled at them, showing no intention of retreating. It wasn't until the hikers charged again that the coyote finally retreated a short distance, still watching them warily. Taylor, though weak and conscious, was gravely injured. Blood poured from her multiple bites. The hikers, recognizing the seriousness of her injuries, quickly called 911. A Royal Canadian Mounted Police officer arrived soon after and fired a warning shot into the air, causing the coyote to retreat further. Despite the officer's efforts, Taylor's injuries were too severe. She was rushed to the hospital, but the blood loss proved fatal, and she died shortly after arriving. The attack raised unsettling questions. Had Taylor unknowingly approached a den, triggered predatory instincts, or perhaps fed the coyotes? No clear answers emerged. Authorities hunted and killed the 3 coyotes involved, including the alpha male found standing over Taylor. Despite opposition from Taylor's mother, a wildlife advocate, the culling went ahead, highlighting how these animals had lost their fear of humans. In the aftermath, Taylor Mitchell's family established a trust supporting arts education and habitat preservation. Her music and environmental passion endure, a lasting legacy despite her tragic death. Thank you for joining us as we explored the unsettling stories of famous individuals whose lives were claimed by deadly animals. These chilling events remind us that even the most unexpected encounters can have fatal consequences. But before you go, there's one more story you must hear. It takes place on a quiet farm in South Africa where Marius Els, a former army major, raised a wild hippo named Humphrey from a young age, believing he had tamed it. For years they lived together, man and beast, bonded by an unlikely connection. But one fateful day, everything changed. The very animal Marius thought he knew better than anyone turned on him in a way no one could have predicted. February 4th, 2023 was a scorching summer day in North Fremantle, Australia. Like many other teenagers seeking relief from the relentless heat, 16-year-old Stella Berry and her friends decided to cool off at the Swan River, a popular but seemingly safe alternative to the crowded beaches along the western coast. The river, winding through Perth before spilling into the Indian Ocean, was a familiar hangout spot, a place where they could swim, sunbathe, and enjoy the carefree days of youth. That afternoon, the group arrived at their usual spot along the riverbank, where the water was calm and inviting. They splashed around for a while, floating in the cool water and laughing under the sun. The river, sheltered from ocean waves and teeming with life, felt like the perfect escape. Stella and her friends were enjoying what seemed to be an idyllic summer day, unaware that danger was lurking beneath the surface. At around 3:30 p.m., as the group lounged by the water's edge, something caught Stella's eye, a flash of gray cutting through the river. She sat up, watching as a pod of dolphins appeared, their sleek bodies surfacing as they moved in unison toward the ocean. The sight was mesmerizing. Dolphins were a common but always thrilling presence in the Swan River, and their sudden appearance sent a wave of excitement through the group. Without hesitation, Stella made a decision that would change everything. She jumped into the water. Wanting to get closer to the dolphins, she waded in, paddling toward the pod with a mix of awe and exhilaration. But what she didn't realize was that she wasn't alone in the water. The dolphins had company, a bull shark. Unlike great white sharks, which typically patrol deeper ocean waters, bull sharks have a unique ability that makes them even more dangerous. They can survive in both saltwater and fresh water. Utilizing special glands and kidney adaptations, they can regulate salt levels in their bodies, allowing them to swim far up rivers and estuaries where most other sharks wouldn't survive. This makes them one of the few shark species that can come into direct contact with humans in environments that seem completely safe. And on that day, one had been following the dolphins. As Stella swam out, the bull shark lurked beneath the murky water, its instincts honed by millions of years of evolution. It had been hunting in the river, likely drawn in by the scent of fish or even the dolphins themselves. But in that moment, as it sensed the movement above, its focus shifted. Stella had no idea the terror lurking beneath her. The water was clear near the surface, but the depths concealed a predator that was about to strike. And just as she reached the dolphins, everything changed in an instant. The bull shark surged forward. Stella barely had time to react before an excruciating pain tore through her leg. A force unlike anything she'd ever felt yanked her downward, sending shockwaves of agony through her body. Instinctively, she thrashed, kicking and clawing at whatever had clamped onto her. But her frantic movements only seemed to fuel the predator's aggression. As the water around her turned red, the truth became horrifyingly clear. She was in the jaws of a bull shark. Her screams echoed across the river, piercing through the humid summer air. On the shore, her friends watched in terror, calling her name, pleading for her to fight. But they were powerless. The attack was unfolding right in front of them, but there was nothing they could do except scream for help. Every second felt like an eternity. The water churned violently as the shark dragged her beneath the surface, then let go for just a moment, circling back as if to strike again. Stella fought to keep her head above water, gasping for air as waves of panic and pain surged through her. Her leg felt like it was on fire, the wound gushing blood into the river, attracting the shark even more. The predator, sensing its prey weakening, moved in again, its powerful body slicing through the water with terrifying ease. She kicked with everything she had left, desperate to break free, but her strength was fading. The onlookers on shore could see the massive shadow moving beneath the surface, stalking her. It was a battle of survival, and Stella was running out of time. Just then, a man standing nearby sprang into action. Without hesitation, he plunged into the river, battling against the current as he raced toward Stella. The shark had disappeared for a moment, slipping into the depths, and the man seized his chance. He grabbed hold of her and with all his strength pulled her toward the shore. But Stella's body was limp. She had lost consciousness, whether from the blood loss, shock, or sheer exhaustion, no one could tell. The rescuer fought against the weight of her body, the pull of the water, and the looming fear that the shark could return at any second. By the time he reached the riverbank, emergency responders had already arrived. Police boats patrolled the area, sirens blaring as paramedics rushed forward to attend to Stella. Every second counted. The paramedics worked frantically, applying pressure to her wounds, but the extent of her injuries was catastrophic. The bite had severed arteries, and despite their best efforts, there was nothing they could do. Stella's life slipped away on the banks of the Swan River, her bright future stolen in a heartbeat. The teenage girl who had just moments ago been chasing dolphins was gone. As the news of Stella's death spread, authorities wasted no time in issuing a public warning. They urged people to stay out of the water while a search for the shark was conducted. No one wanted to take another risk. A day later, a 2.5-meter bull shark was caught about a kilometer upstream from where the attack had occurred. Local fishermen had used bait to lure the predator, but what shocked them most was the direction it had come from. Instead of returning to the ocean, the shark had remained deep in the river, far from where people would typically expect such a threat. Rather than euthanizing the animal, officers made the decision to relocate it far out into the ocean, hoping it wouldn't return. Some believed this was the right thing to do. The shark had simply acted on instinct. In the murky water, it may have mistaken Stella for one of the dolphins, but since she was swimming alone, separate from the pod, she became the easier target. Whether a case of mistaken identity or a deliberate strike, the result was the same: a young life lost too soon. The community was shaken. The Swan River had not seen a fatal shark attack in over a century, yet tragedy had struck when no one expected it. Stella's friends, family, and classmates gathered for a vigil, placing flowers and candles at the riverside in her memory. They spoke of her kindness, her infectious energy, and her dreams of traveling the world. She had been a talented athlete, a dedicated hockey player, and a beloved friend. Her loss was immeasurable. Despite reassurances from officials that shark attacks in the river were incredibly rare, the reality remained. Wherever there's water, there's always risk. Stella Berry had no idea that an ordinary summer afternoon would end in horror, that she would become another reminder of nature's unforgiving force. This wasn't the only time the waters of Australia took someone's life. They have always been dangerous. They were cruel enough to end the lives of a group of friends, too. It was 1967 in Sydney, Australia. A group of friends set out for what was supposed to be a fun and relaxing day. There were 4 of them in total, 3 adults and 1 child packed into a car, cruising along the coastline, enjoying the scenic drive. The road took them through Dover Heights, an eastern suburb of Sydney known for its breathtaking cliffs that towered over the Pacific Ocean. But on this particular day, those views were obscured by thick autumn fog that rolled in from the sea, turning the drive into something far more dangerous. The mist hung heavy, shrouding the road ahead, making it difficult to see more than a few feet in front of the car. Still, they pressed on, unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. As they made their way along the winding cliffside roads, the child in the back seat began to fidget. He had dropped something onto the floor and couldn't reach it. Frustrated, he started to cry, his small voice cutting through the muffled quiet of the foggy morning. The driver, trying to soothe him, made a split-second mistake. He reached back to grab the item without stopping the car. His hands fumbled in the footwell. His attention diverted from the road just long enough for disaster to strike. By the time he realized he had veered too far to the left, it was already too late. The tires screeched as he slammed the brakes, but momentum carried the car forward. It crashed through the metal safety barrier, shattering it into pieces. The vehicle shot through the air, the passengers screaming as gravity took hold. The car didn't fall directly into the sea, not at first. Instead, it smashed into jagged rocks jutting out from the cliff face, coming to a sickening halt in a near vertical position. It dangled precariously, its front end tilting downward toward the waves far below. The violent impact threw the front passenger forward with incredible force, sending her hurtling straight through the windshield. She plummeted 100 feet, her body spinning through the air before slamming into the ocean. The moment she hit the water, she didn't move. The impact alone may have been enough to take her life. But even if she had survived the fall, she would never make it back to shore. Within moments, the ocean around her darkened as sleek, shadowy shapes rushed toward her. The splash had drawn them in, and the scent of fresh blood sealed her fate. A frenzy erupted in the water as 14 sharks swarmed her lifeless body, tearing into her with unrelenting savagery. From the precarious wreckage above, the driver watched in horror. The once serene water had turned into a bubbling, thrashing mass of fins, tails, and teeth. The ocean turned red as the woman's body disappeared beneath the chaos. His stomach clenched with fear as he turned his attention to the rest of the passengers. He tried to look over his shoulder, but his seatbelt held him firmly in place. He struggled against it, desperate to move, to check if the others were alive. The car groaned under its own weight, the metal frame creaking with every slight movement. It swayed on the rocks, clinging on by mere inches. The driver barely dared to breathe, afraid that even the smallest shift would send them all tumbling into the sea. When he finally managed to glance behind him, his heart sank. The child and the other passenger were completely still. He called out their names, his voice hoarse with desperation, but there was no response. He didn't know if they were unconscious or worse, but he knew one thing: if they didn't get out soon, none of them would make it out alive. People gathered at the cliff's edge, horrified at the sight of the teetering vehicle. Emergency services were on their way, but time was slipping away with each agonizing second. Inside the car, the driver was barely holding on. Blood seeped from the deep gash on his forehead, trickling down his face and into his eyes. His vision was blurry, his head throbbing with sharp, relentless pain. Every breath felt shallow, his pulse hammering in his ears like a war drum. His hands trembled as he tried to steady himself, but terror had its grip on him. The car groaned and creaked under its own weight, shifting slightly with every tiny movement. He barely dared to breathe, praying the rocks would hold. But after 30 agonizing minutes, the inevitable happened. The jagged rocks beneath the car finally crumbled. The car lurched violently, then plunged downward. The man barely had time to scream before he was weightless, tumbling through the air. The vehicle flipped as it fell, slamming against the rocky cliffside before smashing into the water below. The impact was bone-rattling. For a brief moment, the car floated, bobbing like a buoy, but the damage had already been done. Water rushed in from all sides. The man, still strapped into his seat, gasped as the icy current surged around his legs. He clawed at his seatbelt, frantically trying to unclip it, but it wouldn't budge. The cold stole his breath, and panic set in as the water level rose, creeping up his chest, then his neck. Then, just outside the shattered windshield, something moved. A shadow, long and sleek, glided through the water. Then another, a flash of gray, a fin, then another. The man's stomach twisted in sheer horror. The sharks had returned. Drawn by the scent of blood, they had gathered in numbers, circling the sinking wreckage like vultures over a fresh carcass. He knew that if he didn't get out now, he would drown, or worse, be devoured alive. The thrashing sounds behind him made his blood run cold. He turned just in time to see the sharks forcing their way into the broken back windows, their powerful bodies wedging through the wreckage. They were going for the unconscious passengers. The sight sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He had to act now. With one last desperate yank, he loosened the seatbelt and freed himself. The car was sinking fast, and soon there would be no escape. He pressed himself against the roof of the car, took one deep, desperate breath, and plunged underwater. Darkness surrounded him. The murky water blurred his vision, but he could make out the massive shapes moving all around him. Sharks, circling, waiting. He stayed as still as possible, clinging to the hope that they wouldn't notice him in the chaos of the sinking wreckage. His lungs burned as he scanned for a way out. The windscreen was his only option. He pushed off the seat and kicked forward, propelling himself through the gaping hole where the windshield had once been. As he swam, the water around him clouded red. His wound. The moment his blood diffused into the sea, the sharks turned their attention. Their movements changed, faster, more deliberate. One darted toward him. He twisted, narrowly avoiding its snapping jaws, and forced himself to the surface. Breaking through the water, he gasped for air and immediately scrambled onto the car's roof. His hand slipped on the wet metal, but he managed to haul himself up, his chest heaving. He barely had a moment to collect himself before he saw the dorsal fins closing in from all directions. He wiped the blood from his face and turned his gaze toward the shore. It was so close, but the sea between him and safety was filled with death. Then he heard it, the deep guttural sounds of the sharks as they reached the back seat. The feeding frenzy had begun. The wreckage shook violently as tails slapped the water and bodies twisted through the broken windows. The car, groaning under the pressure, tilted downward. He had seconds to decide: stay and sink with it or dive into the water and risk everything. There was no time to hesitate. If he waited any longer, he knew there would be nothing left of him. With every ounce of strength left in his battered body, he leapt from the roof of the sinking car, propelling himself toward the shoreline. The distance was short, but to him it might as well have been miles. He knew the sharks would sense his movement, that any second a powerful jaw could clamp down on his leg and drag him under. But there was no other choice. He had to keep going. His arms carved through the water, his legs kicking furiously, every stroke bringing him closer to survival. The seconds stretched, each one filled with the unbearable tension of waiting for the inevitable attack. His lungs screamed for air, his muscles burned with exhaustion, and still he pushed forward. He braced himself, expecting the sudden searing pain of teeth sinking into his flesh. Any moment now, the pull of a predator's grip, the violent thrashing of death. But somehow, miraculously, it never came. His fingers scraped against rock, and he latched on, hauling himself onto the jagged shoreline. Coughing, shaking, barely able to believe he had made it, he turned just in time to see the car disappear beneath the surface. The sea swallowed it whole, leaving behind only ripples and red-tinged foam. Below, the sharks remained in a frenzy, their sleek bodies twisting and churning as they followed the car into the depths. Even as the wreck vanished, the water roiled with their frenzied movements. When emergency services finally reached him, the man was rushed to the hospital, barely able to process the horror he had just survived. His injuries were severe. A deep wound to his head, a strained neck, and the numbing grip of shock that would not release him for days. But he lived. He was the only one who did. His survival, however, came at a devastating cost. His friends were gone, taken in a brutal and merciless attack that no one could have foreseen. The horror of that day would haunt him forever, a nightmare that played on a loop in his mind. Over the years, Sydney Harbor had been the site of numerous shark attacks, its dark waters home to predators that ruled the depths. The exact species responsible for the attack was never confirmed, though experts suspected it was the work of bull sharks, one of the few species known to hunt in coordinated groups. It serves as a grim reminder. The moment we step into the ocean, we're no longer at the top of the food chain. We're at their mercy. It's not just Australia, though. A few decades later, two surfers in South Africa, blissfully unaware of the dangerous waters, became shark food. In July 1994, the waters off South Africa's coastline had become a hunting ground. Unbeknownst to swimmers and surfers, sharks had been drawn closer to shore in recent weeks, following migrating fish, seals, and the seasonal calving of southern right and humpback whales. The presence of these apex predators wasn't immediately obvious until it was too late. On Saturday, July 9, 1994, two friends, Bruce Corby and Andrew Carter, headed to Nahoon Reef, one of the Eastern Cape's most renowned surf spots. The area, known for hosting international competitions, boasted near-perfect conditions that day. Powerful rolling waves, a light breeze, and warm winter temperatures. For experienced surfers like Bruce and Andrew, it was an invitation they couldn't resist. As they pulled their surfboards from the roof of their car, they scanned the ocean. The sun reflected off the surface, the waves cresting at nearly 6.5 feet high. Other surfers were already in the water carving through the swells. Strapping their leashes to their ankles, Bruce and Andrew paddled out about 220 yards just beyond the breakers. Below them, the reef created a perfect foundation for the rising waves, the water shifting between 8 and 12 feet deep. They caught wave after wave, their bodies moving with ease, completely unaware of what lurked beneath. After surfing for about half an hour, Andrew Carter felt a sudden violent impact from behind. Even before he turned to look, he knew it could only be one thing: a shark. As he twisted around, he came face to face with a massive great white, nearly 12 feet long. A surge of terror gripped him, but there was no time to think. The shark's jaws clamped around his leg, the force crushing his bones and shredding flesh in a single bite. At first, shock and adrenaline dulled the pain, but the sheer pressure of the attack was unbearable. He let out a desperate scream, the water around him turning red as he thrashed in the shark's grip. A nearby surfer, seeing the chaos unfold, panicked and paddled frantically toward shore, leaving Andrew alone to fight for his life. The shark continued its attack, trying to pull Andrew off his board, but he clung to it with every ounce of strength he had. Just when it seemed like he would be dragged under, the predator loosened its grip. Andrew acted fast, shoving his board into the shark's mouth as it lunged again. The great white snapped down, thrashing its powerful head from side to side, momentarily distracted. Taking his only chance, Andrew swam with everything he had, but the shore was still agonizingly far. He knew he couldn't outswim the shark. A quick glance back sent a fresh wave of terror through him. The shark had released the board and disappeared below the surface. It was circling, preparing for another attack. In desperation, he scrambled back onto his board, knowing it was his only chance. John Bourne, another surfer, had seen the horrific scene unfold and rushed toward Andrew. Amidst the swirling blood in the water, John spotted an oncoming wave, their only hope. He shouted at Andrew to catch it. Incredibly, the 6-foot swell lifted Andrew up and carried him toward the shore, pushing him away from the shark's reach. His leg was barely attached, but he focused on nothing but survival, praying that the wave would take him all the way in. He refused to look back, terrified that the shark was still following. Finally, he reached the shore, collapsing in agony. Screaming for help, Andrew barely clung to consciousness. 2 girls sunbathing nearby sprinted toward him, dragging him out of the surf and onto the sand. They worked frantically to slow the bleeding, using one of their tops as a tourniquet. His leg was nearly severed, hanging on by just a few inches of flesh. As his vision blurred, darkness crept in. He could hear muffled voices, feel his body growing cold. In those moments, he thought about his family, his friends, and whether this would be the end. But paramedics arrived just in time, racing to stabilize him before rushing him to the hospital. Though he had survived, his nightmare was far from over, and the shark wasn't finished. While Andrew was lucky enough to catch the wave and get hauled out of the water, Bruce was still struggling to paddle to shore. And moments after letting Andrew go, the great white launched itself toward his friend Bruce Corby. Without warning, the beast struck, its jaws clamping down on Bruce's leg with terrifying force. He barely had time to cry out before he was yanked from his surfboard and dragged under. The impact knocked the air from his lungs, and the immense pressure around his leg was unbearable. Then, in a sickening instant, the shark's jaws closed tighter, and his right leg was completely severed just above the knee. Freed from the predator's grip, Bruce kicked desperately, fighting his way to the surface. He gasped for air, blood pouring into the water around him. The shark, meanwhile, continued to attack his surfboard, thrashing violently. A nearby surfer rushed toward Bruce, trying to get him onto his board, but panic and blood loss made it nearly impossible. Struggling to stay afloat, Bruce managed to pull himself onto his own board and began a desperate attempt to reach shore. A lucky wave finally helped carry him toward the jagged rocks. As he neared the shoreline, he shouted in agony, his voice barely audible above the crashing surf. "My leg is gone! I've just lost my leg!" Surfers on the beach ran to his aid, pulling him out of the water and onto the rocks, using another surfboard as a makeshift stretcher. He had been conscious up until then, but the massive blood loss was quickly taking its toll. Just minutes after reaching the car park, Bruce lost consciousness. Paramedics were already on the scene for Andrew, and they fought to revive Bruce, stabilizing him long enough to rush him to the hospital. But tragically, he never regained consciousness. Bruce Corby was pronounced dead the next day at just 22 years old. Andrew was taken to the hospital where he stayed for 2 long, agonizing months. Although they didn't have to amputate his legs, the doctors told him he might never walk again. But after months of recovery, against all odds, he defied their expectations. He learned to walk. In the aftermath of the attack, once fully healed, Andrew left South Africa, moving to the UK for more therapy and respite. The memories of that fateful day never left him, but he defied all odds. Not only did he learn to walk, but he even returned to surfing off the southwest coast of Britain. To this day, he still keeps the surfboard from that day, stained with blood and marked with a massive bite out of its side. It serves as a chilling reminder that no matter how skilled a surfer might be, in the eyes of a shark, they are still prey. Shark attacks have long been debated. Were they cases of mistaken identity? Were humans just an accidental meal in the eyes of these apex predators? In most cases, sharks bite once and then swim away, realizing that humans are not their natural prey. But this attack had been different. This shark had shown no hesitation, no mercy. It had struck twice, aggressively, relentlessly. First Andrew, then Bruce. It hadn't been an accident. It had been a calculated assault. Bruce Corby's death served as a chilling reminder of the raw, untamed power of the ocean. November 18, 2016 began like any other late autumn morning on the outskirts of Sochi, Russia. A cold drizzle hung in the air, coating rooftops and tree branches with a damp sheen. The air was quiet, broken only by the distant barking of dogs and the occasional rumble of a car on wet pavement. On a narrow hillside road just outside the city limits, a pale green 2-story villa sat behind a wrought iron gate, simple, quiet, and tucked between tall pines. Inside that house, 26-year-old social media influencer Irina Volkova was starting her day. Within the hour, the peaceful morning would take a violent turn, triggered by the very animal she had raised for nearly 2 years. Irina lived alone, except for her golden retriever and a young male chimpanzee named Roma. A freelance translator and a part-time administrative assistant for a regional import-export firm, she worked from home and lived modestly. The house had once belonged to her grandparents. After their passing, it was inherited jointly by Irina and her mother, who lived in St. Petersburg. The property wasn't luxurious, worn tile floors, drafty windows, but it offered the one thing Irina valued most: privacy. She had acquired Roma in 2014 through an exotic pet contact in Krasnodar, paying the equivalent of $12,000 funded through personal savings and a small inheritance. He was just a toddler then, wide-eyed, curious, and clingy. She kept him in clothes, taught him basic commands, and gave him a sunroom outfitted with toys, a climbing bar, and heating for the colder months. Her Instagram page with over 11,000 followers was filled with quiet lifestyle images, interior shots, her garden, and sometimes Roma sitting nearby. Born to middle-class parents in St. Petersburg, Irina had always been drawn to animals. As a child, she volunteered at local shelters and dreamed of becoming a veterinarian before her language skills pulled her toward translation work, in addition to her social media influencer presence. Her fascination with primates began during a university trip to the Moscow Zoo, where she spent hours observing the chimpanzees. Friends described her as introverted but deeply compassionate, often going out of her way to help injured wildlife. Her decision to acquire Roma came after months of research, or what she believed was adequate research into chimpanzee care. But Roma was growing and changing. By 2016, he had reached over 90 pounds and was entering adolescence, a stage that often marks a turning point in chimpanzees. What had once seemed playful began to take on a different tone. He shrieked when confined, hurled objects across the room, and responded with flashes of aggression when denied food or attention. Irina had no formal training in animal behavior. She learned through online forums and scattered advice from other exotic pet owners. But the instincts she was now dealing with were far more complex and far more dangerous than she realized. Chimpanzees are among our closest relatives, sharing approximately 98.6% of our DNA. In the wild, they live in complex social groups of 15 to 150 individuals, developing sophisticated hierarchies and communication systems. Adult males typically weigh between 88 and 132 pounds and possess strength estimated at 1.5 times that of an adult human. Their aggression isn't random, but often tied to establishing dominance, a natural behavior that becomes dangerous in domestic settings. Unlike domesticated animals bred over thousands of generations, chimps retain their wild instincts regardless of human upbringing. In Russia, exotic pet ownership remained largely unregulated, with fewer than 50 documented cases of privately owned chimpanzees nationwide. That morning, Roma had been unusually agitated. He paced restlessly inside his sunroom enclosure, slapping the window and vocalizing loudly as Irina prepared his food. She let him out earlier than usual, likely in an attempt to calm him, and placed a bowl of eggs, bananas, and chopped nuts on the kitchen floor near his favorite spot. He ate quickly but continued to pace afterwards, swatting at furniture and throwing one of his toys across the room. Irina didn't post anything online that morning. She sent a brief text to a friend around 9:20 a.m. simply saying she was trying to calm Roma down. It would be the last message she ever sent. By 9:40 a.m., her golden retriever had been let outside and the house was quiet. Irina moved to the stairwell landing with a basket of laundry in her arms, heading toward the bedrooms. Roma followed her into the hallway, his vocalizations now sharp and erratic. As she turned, perhaps to speak to him or guide him back to his enclosure, he attacked. The initial strike was brutal. Roma grabbed her by the shoulders and slammed her into the floor. Her head struck the corner of the wall, leaving a deep blood smear along the baseboard. Before she could rise, he bit into the back of her neck, tearing through muscle and cartilage. Irina screamed and tried to crawl away, leaving behind streaks of blood and handprints on the tiles as she dragged herself toward the kitchen. Roma climbed onto her back, his full weight pressing her down, and began tearing at her scalp and face. She fought back, bracing herself against the wall, clawing at the floor, but he overpowered her easily. Her left hand was mangled, her wrist snapped by the force of his grip. Over the next several minutes, the chimp continued the assault with chilling focus. He bit through her ear, clawed at her eyes, and tore open her trachea. Blood coated the walls and pooled beneath her body as her breathing grew shallow. The air was thick with the sounds of grunts, frantic movement, and flesh being torn. Her screams grew weaker and eventually stopped altogether. Outside, the family dog barked furiously from the backyard. At 10:03 a.m., a neighbor walking past the property paused at the gate, alarmed by the noise. When she called out and received no answer, she peered through the fence and noticed the front door slightly ajar. She immediately called emergency services, reporting that something was wrong at the address. Police arrived at 10:14 a.m. The front door was unlocked and the responding officers entered with weapons drawn. Inside, they found overturned furniture, blood-smeared walls, and Irina's body lying motionless in the hallway at the base of the stairs. 10 feet away, Roma stood over her, his face, chest, and hands soaked in blood. As the officers approached, the chimpanzee turned sharply and bared his teeth, letting out a short, aggressive screech before stepping forward. Fearing an imminent attack, both officers opened fire. Roma was struck multiple times in the chest and neck and collapsed beside Irina's body. He died at the scene. Paramedics confirmed Irina's death shortly afterward. She had sustained catastrophic injuries, over 30 bite wounds, a crushed windpipe, shattered facial bones, and extensive trauma to her limbs and torso. The blood loss alone would have been fatal, but the trauma to her throat and skull left no doubt that death came violently and quickly. Her service pistol, stored in a locked drawer upstairs, had never been reached. There was no legal recourse. Russia had no clear law prohibiting private primate ownership at the time, and no charges were filed. Irina's death received little attention outside of regional media. Her Instagram account was quietly shut down, and friends expressed shock, though some later admitted Roma had shown warning signs. One neighbor recalled hearing loud screaming from the house weeks earlier, but assumed it was a domestic argument. No public memorial was held. Her family requested privacy and declined all interviews. Today, nothing marks the house where she died. The gate remains locked, the window shuttered. Roma hadn't lashed out because he was mistreated. He was well-fed, physically healthy, and cared for in the way Irina believed was enough. But instinct is not something that can be loved away, and when it finally surfaced, there was nothing she could do to stop it. She never stood a chance. But not all danger comes from exotic pets kept behind closed doors. Sometimes it's the wild itself that turns deadly. Calm, inviting, and just deceptive enough to let your guard down. In our next story, a young woman on a solo kayaking trip in Florida steps into shallow water and is taken by a crocodile. July 4th, 2018 was already sweltering by mid-morning in the Florida Everglades. The sun bore down through scattered clouds, baking the surface of the winding river system that twisted through mangroves and cypress groves like dark veins. Dragonflies hovered in the humidity, and the drone of cicadas filled the air. On a secluded stretch of water near Chokoloskee Island, the only sounds were the gentle splash of paddles and the occasional call of a distant heron. Two brightly colored kayaks drifted slowly along the shoreline, piloted by tourists who rented them from a local outfitter that morning. The front kayak was 23-year-old Avery Thomas, a visitor from Oregon and part-time social media content creator, accompanied by her boyfriend James Paul Mateer, who paddled beside her. She wasn't widely known, just a low-key fitness and travel influencer with a few thousand followers, known mostly for beach shots, lighthearted captions, and a quiet, natural aesthetic. She wasn't flashy, she didn't chase danger, but that day, one decision would cost her everything. Avery had flown into Miami 3 days earlier with James to visit friends and spend the long weekend exploring southern Florida. On July 4th, she booked a solo excursion out to the 10,000 Islands area. Miles of interwoven water trails, brackish bays, and marsh channels that formed one of the richest wetland ecosystems in North America. The rental company gave them a safety briefing and a laminated route map with clear instructions: do not enter the side bay near marker 17, and absolutely do not enter the water under any circumstances. The area was known for dense alligator and crocodile populations, and even locals avoided wading or swimming there. The Everglades ecosystem spans over 1.5 million acres of subtropical wetlands, a complex tapestry of sawgrass marshes, mangrove forests, and cypress swamps that supports over 350 species of birds, 300 species of fish, and 40 species of mammals. The 10,000 Islands region where Avery and James paddled represents one of the most biologically diverse areas, with brackish waters creating a unique transition zone between freshwater and marine environments. This ecological richness makes it a prime hunting ground for apex predators like alligators and crocodiles. July marks the height of breeding season, when territorial behaviors intensify and normally reclusive animals become more aggressive in defending their space. Avery wasn't planning anything risky. She and her boyfriend had rented kayaks for a quiet morning on the water, hoping to enjoy the scenery and the rising heat, unaware that before long she'd step out to cool off in the worst possible place. Her outfit was practical: athletic shorts, a sports bra, and water shoes, and her phone was secured in a waterproof pouch around her neck. The guide who helped launch their kayaks described the couple as laid back and easygoing. They pushed off just after 9 a.m., following the marked route along the mangrove-lined shore. By 10:12 a.m., they had reached a quiet inlet near the edge of the mangroves. The water was calm and glassy, shaded by overhanging branches, and the air was already thick with humidity. Avery commented to her boyfriend about how unreal the water looked, still and clear, almost too perfect to be real. They paused for a few minutes, letting their kayaks drift while they took in the view and snapped a few casual photos on their phones. At some point, Avery paddled slightly ahead and pulled her kayak toward a narrow section of shoreline. The map she'd been given showed restricted areas clearly, but there were no buoys or warning markers in the water itself. The spot she chose didn't look any different from the rest of the cove, just a peaceful stretch of shallows surrounded by mangroves. She stepped out of her kayak and waded into the water, likely to cool off and take a picture. Her boyfriend remained in his kayak nearby, still floating a short distance off the bank. Neither of them realized she had just crossed into a high-risk area. She never got the chance to take the photo. Standing in the shallows, she would have no view of what was beneath her feet. The stillness of the water, broken only by the gentle rocking of her empty kayak, gave no indication of what was about to happen. From beneath the overhanging brush, a large crocodile had been lying submerged, nearly motionless. Experts later estimated its size at over 13 feet in length and roughly 800 pounds in weight, an adult male in peak condition. In shallow coastal bays like this one, crocodiles are known to remain hidden for hours, waiting patiently for any sign of movement near the waterline. It's likely that Avery never saw it approach. American crocodiles, unlike their more aggressive alligator cousins, tend to avoid humans when possible. But in southern Florida's warm summer months, food competition and mating season can drive even normally elusive crocs closer to human activity. Crocodiles in the region can reach over 15 feet long and weigh up to 1,000 pounds. They're powerful swimmers with incredible burst speed in the water, capable of launching their entire bodies several feet in a single lunge. Their bite force is one of the strongest in the animal kingdom, measured at over 3,000 pounds per square inch. And once they grab hold, their attack often involves a violent spin known as the death roll, designed to disorient prey and tear flesh with maximum force. Conditions that morning, warm water, quiet shoreline, and an isolated human presence, were exactly the kind that draw predators close. And by the time Avery stepped into the shallows, the crocodile was already waiting. It had been lying still beneath the brush, submerged in less than 2 feet of water, its body perfectly camouflaged in the shadows. Then, without a sound, it lunged from the shallows. It struck with shocking speed, its jaws clamping down around Avery's lower torso and thigh, lifting her off her feet and dragging her sideways into deeper water. The attack lasted only seconds. One moment, she was standing waist-deep calling back to James. The next, she was gone beneath the surface. She resurfaced once, flailing, her arms thrashing weakly as a cloud of blood spread through the water. She managed to get out a short, broken cry before the crocodile dragged her under again. This time it rolled. The violent spin twisted her body, tearing through ligaments and muscle, fracturing ribs, and nearly severing her leg at the hip. James shouted her name and began paddling toward her, but the water had already gone still. He reached the shoreline within moments, scanning the surface, yelling into the trees, hoping she would reappear. But there was nothing, just ripples and the slow-moving reddish trail spreading away from the mangroves. He saw one of her water shoes float to the surface and realized she wasn't coming back. James used his cell phone to call for help, his voice breaking as he gave their coordinates to the operator. Within 30 minutes, rangers from the National Park Service launched a search. 2 airboats and a dive team were dispatched to the cove. James remained near the shore as long as he was allowed, shaken and silent, unable to explain what had just happened. Avery's kayak was recovered near the inlet, still containing her phone, towel, and dry bag. It took just over 2 hours to locate her remains. Divers found her body partially wedged beneath a sunken mat of mangrove roots, about 40 yards from where she'd entered the water. She had sustained severe injuries consistent with a crocodile attack. Deep bite wounds across the torso and leg, a dislocated shoulder, a crushed rib cage, and significant tearing to the abdomen from rotational force. The medical examiner later confirmed her cause of death as traumatic injury and rapid blood loss. By the time they pulled her from the water, there was nothing anyone could have done. Wildlife officials tracked and euthanized a large male crocodile later that week after it was spotted in the same cove. A necropsy confirmed the presence of human tissue and fragments of clothing that matched Avery's. The animal showed no signs of disease or distress. It was healthy, territorial, and behaving exactly as nature had designed it to. There were no lawsuits filed. The outfitter had provided clear verbal and written warnings, including a strict no-swimming policy and detailed map restrictions. Avery had signed the waiver and had not been pressured or misled. Her family, devastated, released a brief statement through a local attorney but declined all interviews. James, who had witnessed the entire attack, spoke briefly with authorities but did not speak publicly afterward. Friends said he returned home quietly and hadn't posted on social media since. The family asked that Avery be remembered not for the accident but for the quiet, creative life she led. Today, the launch site remains open to the public, but local authorities added additional signage near the trailhead and rental station warning visitors not to enter the water. Though there's no memorial, a small notice was placed near the dock where Avery launched, briefly referencing a fatal wildlife incident in 2018. Park rangers began monitoring the area more frequently during peak tourism months, and updated safety maps now include clear no swimming zones with reinforced guidelines about crocodile activity in the region. And it's not just swamps and mangroves where predators strike. Even the open ocean, clear, still, and seemingly safe, can hide a killer beneath the surface. In our final story, a fitness influencer takes a quiet swim off the coast of Australia and is fatally attacked by a great white shark. September 2nd, 2021 began like many late summer mornings on the coast of Western Australia. A soft breeze drifted in from the ocean, barely enough to rustle the tops of the scrubby trees lining the dunes. The sun had risen quickly, burning away the last of the morning haze, and by 8 a.m. the sand was already warm beneath bare feet. On a remote stretch of beach just south of Dunsborough, the shoreline curved quietly between jagged limestone cliffs and glassy blue water. There were no lifeguards, no other swimmers, just waves, wind, and the early shimmer of heat on the sand. Madeline Reed, 24, had arrived in Australia 3 days earlier with a small group of friends, finally taking a long-awaited vacation they'd been planning for over a year. The original trip was scheduled for early 2020, but the pandemic forced repeated delays. With travel restrictions finally lifted, they headed to the coast of Western Australia, a destination Madeline had talked about for months. For her, it was the perfect backdrop for adventure, content creation, and time away from routine. Back home in San Diego, Madeline worked part-time as a personal trainer and full-time influencer. Her Instagram following had grown into the tens of thousands, built on fitness videos, bold travel shots, and lifestyle posts that mixed real talk with high-energy workouts and scenic backdrops. She was outgoing, confident, and known among her followers for taking the occasional risk, whether it was climbing out onto a cliff edge for a photo or free diving during coastal hikes. It wasn't reckless behavior, but it was definitely part of her image. Strong, fearless, and always chasing something just out of reach. Madeline was staying with her friends at a small eco-lodge near the coast, a laid-back spot popular with backpackers and seasonal hikers. The group included 25-year-old Danielle Kim, a former college roommate and aspiring travel blogger, and 26-year-old Sarah Whitaker, a freelance photographer who had taken many of Madeline's fitness and lifestyle shots over the past 2 years. The three had been close since university and had been talking about this trip since before the pandemic. The lodge was quiet, affordable, and close to a stretch of beaches that were beautiful, isolated, and largely unpatrolled. The day before, they had explored a clifftop trail overlooking the ocean, and Madeline had posted a photo from the highest point calling the view surreal. The next morning, the three of them set out early to beat the heat and catch the soft morning light. They followed a narrow trail down to a small, quiet bay just outside Dunsborough. Dunsborough, with its population of just 6,000 residents, represents the quieter side of Australian beach culture. Unlike the crowded shores of Sydney or the Gold Coast, its beaches remain largely undeveloped, pristine, but minimally monitored. The town's economy relies on a delicate balance between tourism and preservation, with locals proud of their untouched coastline. The particular beach Madeline chose that morning was known to residents as Shark Alley, a nickname never printed in tourism brochures but whispered among locals who avoided swimming there during dawn and dusk hours. For visitors like Madeline, such crucial local knowledge remained inaccessible without direct conversations with residents. There were no warning signs posted at the access point she used. The beach had no flags, no patrol station, and no lifeguards. It was technically open to the public but considered unmonitored, and regional tourism materials advised visitors to swim at their own risk. The ocean floor dropped off quickly in the area, and local surfers and divers were well aware of the deeper channel that ran parallel to the reef about 60 feet from shore, one known to attract large marine predators, especially during late summer. Shark activity along the Western Australian coast is not uncommon. The region has one of the highest per capita shark attack rates in the world, and species such as the great white, tiger shark, and bull shark are known to cruise coastal drop-offs during early morning hours. Murky water, isolated swimmers, and transitions between shallow and deep water are considered high-risk conditions. But to an outsider on a calm, sunny morning, the beach would have looked inviting, sparkling and still with no immediate signs of danger. Western Australia's coastline hosts one of the world's largest populations of great white sharks, with individuals regularly reaching lengths of up to 15 to 20 feet. The region's unique geography, featuring deep offshore trenches that run parallel to beaches, creates perfect hunting corridors for these apex predators. September marks the beginning of spring in the southern hemisphere, when warming waters trigger increased movement patterns among sharks following seasonal food sources. Between 2000 and 2020, Western Australia recorded 17 fatal shark attacks, the highest concentration in the country. Local conservation efforts had successfully protected these endangered predators, but with protection came increased encounters as shark numbers gradually recovered from decades of hunting. What none of the women realized that morning was that one of those predators was already nearby, drifting just beyond the drop-off, waiting. At around 8:25 a.m., Madeline reached the edge of the water. She placed her towel and water bottle on a flat rock, removed her sandals, and waded in while Sarah stayed back on shore and Danielle stood ankle-deep nearby chatting with her. Madeline appeared to be preparing to take a photo of herself standing in the shallows, posing with the open sea behind her. Her Instagram feed often featured beachside shots like these, sun-kissed, bold, and effortlessly styled, with a mix of athletic confidence and coastal glamour. She didn't venture far, no more than 50 or 60 feet from shore. The water was clear and calm, and the shoreline still well within sight. But just beyond that range, the seabed dropped off sharply into a deeper channel, a known hunting corridor for large sharks moving along the coast. From beneath that trench, a great white shark approached silently. At approximately 8:30 a.m., while she stood in water just above her waist, the shark struck. It moved in quickly and directly, accelerating as it closed the distance, and rose from below in a sudden burst of force. Its jaws clamped around her right thigh and hip, dragging her sideways into deeper water. The bite crushed bones, severed the femoral artery, and tore through muscle across her lower abdomen and leg. She was pulled under immediately. Madeline resurfaced once, briefly, face up, motionless, and surrounded by blood. The shark did not linger. After releasing her, it turned and disappeared back into the deeper water. She did not call for help. The injury would have rendered her unconscious in seconds, with death following quickly due to massive blood loss. Her friends screamed. Danielle ran up the trail trying to get a phone signal while Sarah stayed at the water's edge, frozen in shock and calling out Madeline's name. A couple arriving nearby with paddleboards saw the commotion and contacted emergency services using a satellite device. Marine rescue personnel arrived shortly after 9 a.m. and recovered Madeline from the water. She had sustained catastrophic injuries. The single bite had crushed her pelvis, severed major arteries, and caused extensive tissue trauma. Paramedics confirmed her death at the scene. There were no signs of a second attack or scavenging. Officials temporarily closed the surrounding beaches for 72 hours and issued a public advisory. No shark was captured or killed in response to the attack. Based on the wound pattern and location, marine biologists identified the animal as most likely a juvenile great white, common in the region during late summer when fish activity near the reef increases. Madeline's belongings were collected from the beach later that afternoon. Her phone, protected inside the waterproof pouch, showed no photo or video activity at the time of the incident. Her final Instagram post, uploaded the night before, was a mirror selfie from her lodge with a caption about adjusting to the time zone and feeling ready for the next day. Her death was reported in Australian and US media outlets, but it never became a viral story. She hadn't been live streaming or creating any dangerous content. She had simply gone for a morning swim in a place she didn't fully understand. Her family declined interviews, her Instagram page was deactivated within a week. Friends and clients back home held a quiet memorial at the fitness center where she had worked. No lawsuits were filed, the lodge and local tourism office had provided standard disclaimers and safety guidance, and there was no indication of negligence. Her trip had been booked independently and all arrangements were in her name. Today, the beach looks the same. There's no plaque, no barrier, no mention of what happened. Just a stretch of coastline as beautiful and quiet as the morning she stepped into it. Madeline Reed wasn't careless. She wasn't chasing danger. She was a bold, experienced traveler doing what she loved. But in wild places, even clear water can hide danger. One moment, one misstep, and there's no way back. Danielle and Sarah returned home a week later, both shaken and silent. Neither spoke publicly about what they saw. Sarah deleted most of her photography content in the months that followed, while Danielle stopped updating her travel blog entirely. They remained in contact with Madeline's family but declined all media inquiries. As with many stories like this, the world moved on. But for the people closest to her, the moment never really ended. Thanks for watching. Want to watch more? Click on your screen now.